get you guys to mute your microphone just until we're ready to go, please?
Sure can.
You know what? I keep catching this on the desk and it keeps strangling me, so I will just put it away.
Why are we getting
Good morning and welcome to the July 10th special meeting of Algonquin Highlands Council. We are addressing one issue today, which is short-term rentals in relation to our zoning bylaw amendments or our review. And I'll ask the clerk to do a roll call, please.
Deputy Mayor Danielson?
Unmute your mic, please, Deputy Mayor.
I'm here.
Councillor Berry?
Here.
Councillor Dayu?
Here.
Councillor Shortreed?
Here.
And Mayor Moffat?
Present. Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Councillor Dayu?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As short-term rentals are technically considered a form or a potential form of competition to the traditional cottage resort sector, I'd like to deform pecuniary interest as a cottage resort owner.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Dayu will leave the meeting and she will vanish from the screen. However, she will come back into the meeting at item number 4 for the confirmatory bylaw at the close of the meeting. So unfortunately, you will see your face vanish now from the screen. Thank you for that, Councillor Dayu.
Thank you.
I just want a couple of housekeeping notes before we get to the item of business. The weather's a bit wonky today, and there are some connectivity challenges. So we do have in our policy what is meant to happen if power is lost. It's up to each councillor if they need to reconnect to do so. It's 10 minutes, I believe, Madam Clerk, that we'll suspend the meeting for 10 minutes while a member of council attempts to reconnect should there be a problem. And that's the fun flexibility of these kinds of meetings, is we can't always go by rote and call. If there is a significant power outage in the community, we will again stop the meeting. So anybody who's watching, not to worry, we won't be talking and keeping the discussion going in the absence of it being streamed. So we will keep an eye on that given the weather. I just wanted to, again, just do a little intro about what today's meeting is about. Council chose to address this issue separately as part of the zoning bylaw review because it's quite significant for the community. And there's no question that short-term rentals are a tremendous advantage to the economy of the community, but it's also well known that some short-term rentals are known to be fraught with challenges for a variety of reasons, many of which are addressed in the report that we'll go through today. So it's unfortunate, of course, as is always the case, that there are a few bad apples that ruin it for everybody else, because we know there are many terrific landlords and renters who just live their lives and do their thing without a peep and any problem. And then there are others that are exactly the opposite, which is unfortunate. So this is a formal and legislative process, the zoning bylaw review. There will be plenty of opportunity for public input as we go through the process for this particular issue and the other issues that are contained within the zoning bylaw. We will advise the public when and how to participate formally, to have any comments read into or submitted to the public record for council's consideration as we go through this process. Our meeting today is to explore the positive and negative impact of short-term rentals on our community and just have a look at what other people are doing. It has been suggested as well that as part of the service delivery review at the county level, that short-term rentals perhaps would find a better home county-wide at the county level. But those conversations are still in play. The 3 other municipalities in Haliburton County have already begun their exploratory conversations, so we're playing a bit of catch-up today just to have some information before us that will give us an idea of where we could go, where we might go, and what that might look like. So there are certainly many conversations ahead and lots of work ahead, and I think we all look forward to an organized and thoughtful discussion that will allow for constructive public input as we move ahead. So it's early days yet. and there's lots of work to be done. So without further ado then, having given that little spiel, we'll bring in our planning people. Mr. Greg Corbett, who is our planning consultant, will be brought into the meeting, and also Sean O'Callahan, who is the township's planner. They will just have a moment while they come into the meeting. Good morning, Mr. Corbett and Mr. O'Callahan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Greg, I think you're going to take us through this report, are you not?
That was the plan, I believe, unless Sean wants to take
And-
over all of the but
And it is a rather long report, so we'll bear with you as you take us through it. And please, away you go.
okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor Moffat and members of council. So you took much of my introductory away from me, so maybe I'll just jump right into it.
Sorry.
So I guess the first question is, what exactly is a short-term rental? So what it normally refers to is the rental of a dwelling for a short period of time, generally not exceeding 30 consecutive days. Now, it does not include the traditional commercial accommodations, just hotels, motels, and resorts. And it also does not include bed and breakfast establishment, which involve the rental rooms within a dwelling. Short-term rentals themselves are usually booked through an online platform, such as Airbnb, vacation rentals by owner, Ontario Cottage Rentals, Kijiji, other such ones. So that's basically what we're talking about here, is the rental of through these online platforms. So really, there are generally three types of short-term rentals. The first is where the accommodation unit is the operator's residence, and the operator is present at the time. In the township, this would be considered really a bed and breakfast establishment. The second is the accommodation unit is the operator's residence, and the operator is not present. This is better reflects what was originally envisioned when these platforms were all established, such as Airbnb, and that you would rent your residence when you're not using it. And the third is the accommodation unit is not the owner's residence, and the operator is not present. This is where the platforms have evolved, with operators purchasing properties for the exclusive purpose of renting on a short-term basis. What is a bit of a hybrid, I guess, in the township is that a cottage property that is not normally a primary residence, but it's also not exclusively used for rental. So that's typically what I would say the majority of them in the township are.
Could I ask a question at this point?
Yes, go ahead.
Greg, one thing before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, I'm struggling with trying to determine the difference between a bed and breakfast and a short-term rental, or why a bed and breakfast isn't part of this, because it seems to me that the use is the same.
Sure, if I may, through you, Madam Mayor, is the main difference would be a bed and breakfast is you're only renting out up to in the township up to 3 rooms in your dwelling, and you're normally present at the time. And it also usually includes, as the name says, a meal component to it that is being supplied by the host family to it. So that the main difference has been, so what we've seen evolve more, especially in the township, is that you're not normally renting just a room, you're normally renting the entire dwelling unit to stay in.
Okay, thanks.
Greg, you can carry on, please.
Okay, thanks. So in looking at this in the township, one of the things we didn't do an in-depth review, but we did review short rentals in the township, and we put those in onto the appendix to the report. So what we found, there's approximately, from that quick review, was approximately 100 units in the township. And as would be expected, majority of these are located along the shoreline of the lakes and rivers within the township. And they are, as is indicated, we tried to show them out. So once we were able to find through our review of it, what lakes they were on, showed what the value was put towards them, and also what they were being advertised in terms of how many people they could sleep and how many bedrooms they were. So from the best of our knowledge ability from what we used. That's what we came up. So we came up, there was approximately 100 such units in the township.
And I would have to, I would personally call the list a sampling. I think there's probably 3 or 4 times that number of rentals in the township.
Yeah.
Because there are people who just rent through word of mouth and they're not online anywhere. And I think it's important that the public know that we know that the list, as you said, and is that it is by no means meant to be a hand serve. It's not a complete list of rentals. We couldn't capture that. That's part of the problem.
Yeah. So yeah. So as you said, so some of the things that weren't included, as you've indicated, has been the word of mouth ones, where people perhaps rented to the same people year after year after year. So they have an established one. Other ones, there's some perhaps real estate agents who do this, who will connect people who are looking for them. So those things, they're not on a web platform, so to speak, to do it. So, but yeah, it's definitely just a sampling of what it was, and it was, as I said, not an in-depth review. So currently in the township, your official plan does not contain any specific policies with respect to short-term rentals. It does contain some policy direction with regards to bed and breakfast establishment, and it does set out some criteria as to what they should be, where they should be located and how they should be functioning. And under your zoning bylaw, like the official plan, it has no specific provisions related to short-term rentals. It does for bed and breakfast establishments. They are defined, and again, limited to the number of bedrooms, up to 3 bedrooms in a dwelling. And it also is limited to only 4 zones in the township, that being the rural zone, the rural residential, the hamlet residential, and the shoreline residential, type 1 zone. So in the shoreline residential type 2 zones, you couldn't have a bed and breakfast either. And just a reminder, the difference between the shoreline residential 1 and the shoreline residential 2 zone are that the shoreline residential 1 are accessed from a year-round municipally maintained road. The shoreline type 2 are either on seasonal roads, private roads, or they are water access property. And going through the bylaw, there are also a number of definitions which give an indication that could apply. There's definition of accommodation units. Again, there's bed and breakfast establishment definition. There's tourist establishment definitions, hotel, and dwelling. However, none of them accurately reflect what a short-term rental accommodation is. In the zoning bylaw, so if we go back to the zoning, so the question becomes, one of the first ones, are they permitted in the township? So normally a zoning bylaw typically says prohibiting a use in a defined area unless it is identified as being permitted. So one would think at first, as a short-term rental is not identified in a zone, it would suggest it's not permitted. However, not all of the uses defined in the bylaw, and the definition of a dwelling does make it somewhat more difficult, because it does state includes a residence or sleeping place of 1 or more persons, either continuously, permanently, temporarily, or transitionally. So again, it's very broad definition as to what is a dwelling, and a dwelling is allowed in a number of the residential zones, obviously. So a short-term rental could fall under the definition of a dwelling. So similar definitions exist in the zoning bylaw.
Sorry, Greg, if I could interject just for a moment. For the purposes of a bit of clarity, it's in fact the word transient that's the language that allows for the rentals, right?
Transient, you are correct. I apologize.
Yeah,
So
that's all. I
back
just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So as indicated, similar definitions did exist in the zoning bylaw for the township of Puslet, which is in Ontario as well. And in that case, there was a Superior Court case with regards to the use of a cottage as a short-term rental. And the court found that the provisions in the bylaw there were too vague to restrict uses, to restrict the short-term rental uses. and thus did not prohibit the use of a dwelling as a short-term rental accommodation. What it found was, in many cases, that if it's a cottage, for example, this was a cottage, and the argument tried to be that because it was being rented on a short-term basis, it was functioning as a tourist establishment. What the courts found was, because it did not specifically define what a short-term rental was, did not have specific policies, really the use as a short-term rental was being used in much the same way as it was by the cottager was using it, that they were coming up on weekends or so on, using it and then leaving. It was not their permanent residence. So they said basically they used the exact same weather, and by trying to limit it, you were then zoning it to restrict the people who could use it as opposed to the use. So the court ruled that it was permitted to be used as a short-term rental, and if the municipality wanted to restrict short-term rentals, what they needed to do was to put in specific provisions in their zoning bylaw related to short-term rental. And it's from this that you'll find that many municipalities in the province have now started to turn their attention to short-term rentals and their regulations within zoning bylaws. So from this, it has been the position of the township to date that short-term rentals are a permitted use, and they continue to be permitted within the township at the current time. So in terms of, we go to the impacts, obviously there's positive and negative impacts associated on. The typical negative impacts that are cited with regards to short-term rentals revolve around the environment. One of the main ones, especially in municipalities such as the Township of Algonquin Highlands, is that the usage of the dwelling surpasses the design capacity of the septic system. And you'll see on that list you'll see in some cases, for example, it'll be a 3-bedroom dwelling, and it says that it can accommodate up to 12 people. Well, when you do capacity-wise in establishing and designing our septic system, it's all based on 2 people it's based on the number of bedrooms, and then it assumed 2 people per bedroom. So the usage is much more than what was anticipated for the septic system. I would note, though, when the capacity and the design of a septic system is also extremely conservative, so it does allow for it, because I think we all know in many cases, homes, cottages, whatever, that are on septics, they have more people sometimes visiting than they do in the number of bedrooms. But the fact remains that if it's constantly used for significantly more than what it was designed for, there could be potential for problems associated with it. Other things with regards to the environment are garbage disposal, that garbage is being left on the property or at the end of the road and such. Increased use of the shoreline area. Again, more people within the dwelling that were ever envisioned. And so if we were to go forward, this could be addressed through limiting the number of occupants based on the number of bedrooms within a dwelling. So if we were to say go to restrict it, then it would be restricted to the advertisement to the number of bedrooms that there were. Other issues have been parking. So there's a couple of things that. One is the overflow of parking onto municipal roads and private roads, and also the location on the properties where people are parking where it's not intended. Common one that we hear is parking on the top end and damaging the top end as a result of that. Obviously, another one of the large one that is raised is increased noise, parties, etc. That come out. Obviously, the township does have a noise bylaw, but we all know it's extremely difficult to enforce, and it's quite often after the fact, after the party's done, before it can be brought to the attention of the municipality. Other aspects are the building code and safety, that once you start renting it, especially if you're renting just a certain number of rooms in it, similar to a bed and breakfast, what that does, it does change the application of the building fire code. So if you're doing a separate bedroom and renting it out, it has to be built differently than if it is just a bedroom within a dwelling. So it has to have fire separation as such. So it has to be built to code that way. Obviously, compatibility, impact on the character of the neighborhood, perhaps the impact on the lake community itself as well. We have sometimes it's raised the unfair competition since with established commercial accommodation operations. So with short rentals, they're not commercial, so they don't have to provide the same amenities and the same requirements that a commercial operation does. It's not taxed at the commercial rate, it's taxed at the residential rate. And so those are all seen as saying that they're not really on the same playing field as a typical accommodation, commercial accommodation resort or such. And finally, probably not as major an impact in the municipality, but perhaps in the larger municipalities and those with urban areas is the impact on the housing stock and housing affordability. The concern being that instead of renting an apartment, for example, year round, people find that they can make more money by renting it through a short-term rental with increased rates and flipping it, and thus taking it out of the housing market. Within the township itself, there have been a few written complaints with respect to short-term rentals, and there has also been a number of inquiries, whether asking could they be done and are they permitted, and also questioning whether they are permitted as well. As I said, there's also some positive aspects to them. What's being cited is that they do increase the accommodation options, thereby bringing more people into the area, which otherwise may not come. It does the increase in visitors does benefit the entire tourism sector and the associated service sector associated. Historically, although the establishment of online platforms is relatively new, it started in about 2006 with Airbnb. The concept of renting a cottage for a week or so has been occurring since probably cottaging first started. So it's not new in that sense. And it does provide income opportunities to a property owner, thereby assisting that property owner with the ability to afford to carry the property, whether it be the dwelling or the cottage, through maintenance, taxes, etc. So it allows them to maintain it. So what's been happening? So if we look at, because it's become more and more, I would say, I guess it's all a matter of opinion, a success. Number of municipalities have turned to it and have started to look at it. So quickly, I've provided you with some examples of some of them. I'll go through a few of those. So we have probably the most well-known one is the town of the Blue Mountains. It was the first municipality to address the issue in Ontario, and they did that in 2009. And what they did was they established official plan policies and zone provisions regards to short-term rentals. Now that was subject to a lengthy OMB appeal, and that appeal was dismissed, although there was some modifications, but it was approved, the short-term rental bylaw and OP provision. So what it did was specifically direct these uses to specific areas. It also included a licensing provision, so those units have to be licensed with the municipality. And then establish an occupant load, a separation distance between the units, and requires the submission of certain plans, both home layout plans and also a site plan. I would note that right now, again, it's been on the go for just over 10 years. It is currently being reviewed, and it's one of those things that is evolving. As I said, they were probably the first ones in to try and do this, so they're learning by fire, and they're looking at doing some changes potentially, but that's something in progress right now. The City of Toronto, that's another one that people may recall. It allows short-term rentals in all housing types, but it must be the principal resident of the owner. And it limits the number of days to 180 days per year. And similar to the town of the Blue Mountains, it does have a licensing component to it, so they have to be licensed. And again, this was subject to an OMB appeal, but the bylaw was upheld. So again, in Toronto, I'd say it's probably quite a bit different than the situation in Algonquin Highlands. Obviously, the main thrust to that was the impact on the housing affordability and the housing in the city. Some more closer related to Algonquin Highlands, we have the town of Huntsville. They recently passed a temporary bylaw to address them, and that temporary bylaw is for 2 years. So it restricts short-term rentals to the entire dwelling or up to 2 bedrooms within that dwelling, that provided the owner is within the dwelling. And after 2 years, a new bylaw will either be required or the bylaw will lapse. And they also established licensing under the short-term rental. So again, the units have to be licensed with the municipality. The municipality of Whitestone, that's in the district of Muskoka, district of Parry Sound, it permits short-term rentals in the rural and waterfront areas. And again, it requires licensing. To them is that they do exempt the rentals for 2 weeks a year or less. So they are not required to be licensed as long as you're not renting it for more than 2 weeks in each year. The township of Muskoka Lakes, they investigated the issue. They established a steering committee to look into it. Staff follows the same, interprets the decision from the courts the same way, in that they say the short-term rentals is a residential use and thus is permitted within the residential zones. The steering committee, what they found was that the concerns that were being raised with respect to short-term rentals were more behavioral in nature, and thus applied equally to other users, and thus recommended revising their existing bylaw with regard to noise and parking, and also to establish a code of conduct that would be applied to all residents and all visitors within the municipality. So they set that out. It's on their website, and what they do ask too, if you're doing a short-term rental, that you provide a copy of that to whoever's renting your dwelling or cottage. Township of Lake Cabays, your neighboring municipality, they're currently reviewing the issue. They did post a survey on their website for public input, and that ended in March. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 situation, no further information has been released to date on the findings of that survey or moving forward at this time. With respect to the county of Haliburton, all of the other municipalities are reviewing the issue. Minden Hills and Highlands East both did undertake a survey on the issue of their residents. But the matter currently is on hold in those municipalities, again, to the COVID-19 situation. And the municipality of Dysart has also just initiated a review of the situation. So if we look at it, what can we do? What are the options available to the municipality? Obviously, the first option is always the status quo, and that would be to continue to allow them as a residential use. And the benefits to this, obviously, would be no further action would be required. There'd be no cost involved in maintaining the status quo. The disadvantages that would be associated with this, though, would be that there would continue to be a level of uncertainty. There are those who still question whether short-term rentals are a residential use and whether they should be allowed. It doesn't address any of the potential impacts that we hear. And as Mayor Moffat has indicated, I'm sure councillors get calls from time to time with regards to them, and the municipality does. And it also doesn't provide any opportunity to address any potential building code or fire code infractions that may be associated with those buildings. The second option would be to prohibit outright. So what that would involve would be to actually define a short-term rental in the bylaw, and then not permitted in any zone in the bylaw. So this would then require they would not be permitted as of right It would still be allowed. Someone could come in. Anyone is entitled to apply for a zoning amendment. So you could apply to allow your dwelling / cottage to be used as a short-term rental, but it would have to go through the zoning bylaw amendment process. The benefits would be that it would clarify whether the use is permitted or not right now. It would also then allow for the council yourselves to consider one on a site-by-site basis if you wanted to go that route. It would give the staff the opportunity to ensure compliance with the building code and the fire code. And it also allows for the opportunity for public input, and people would be aware when one is being proposed in a certain area. The disadvantages of that would be there still would be a level of uncertainty to residents and owners as to where one would be permitted. So if someone could apply or not. There would be, I would suggest we would need some official plan policies to establish a framework for considering the application. So provide some criteria that would be used as to where and when they may be permitted through a zoning amendment. Obviously, there would be a time and expense to this process. We would, I'm sure, continue to get requests for bylaw enforcement with regard to those establishments and some that were not that are not operating as being zoned. And it would also allow all of those that exist right now, they would continue to be permitted to continue as a legal non-conforming use. So what that would be doing would be restricting or prohibiting any future new ones, but all existing ones would continue to be able to operate. Option 3 is the OP and zoning bylaw amendment process, and that would be to establish areas in the township where they would be permitted as of right, and establish provisions in the zoning bylaw with respect to them that could address uses such as parking, the occupancy load, and how many bedrooms, for example, could be cited in advertisements, etc. And you also have a separation between those units too, if that was so desired. Benefits would be that it would add some certainty to residents and owners as to where they are permitted and what the performance standards are. It would be much easier to enforce, obviously, and it would reduce the time and expense in processing. So not every new one, if somebody want to establish one, they would know they could be established. They would just have to ensure that they met the provisions. The disadvantages would be that individual operations could be established with no public input whatsoever. It would reduce potential to address the building code and fire code. And again, existing ones would be allowed to continue as legal non-conforming. The fourth option would be option 3, with also a licensing component. So the licensing component could be established under the Municipal Act. So what it could do, again, is establish areas in the township where they would be permitted as right, establish provisions for their operation, and in requiring a licensing of the units. The benefits to this, again, would be add certainty to residents and owners as to where they are permitted and the performance standards. Again, would be easier to enforce. And what the licensing does, it allows for greater monitoring and the establishment of additional requirements. One of the things may be that for example, in Town of the Blue Mountains, 2 of the main benefits they've seen is number 1 is that there has to be, you have to provide a contact information, and they have to be available. That number has to be available. So if the municipality receives complaints, that they can then phone somebody immediately to have that that complaint addressed. And the second aspect too, is that there's a listing so people know where they are all established. So it's not something that somebody, you know, one is licensed, so you know if it's beside you somewhere else on your lake, for example, or in your neighborhood. It also provides the ability to ensure that the building and fire code are addressed. And it also provides for the collection of fees for the licensing. Fines can be associated through the licensing if it is not operated to the requirements set out in the license. And there is also the potential to collect a municipal accommodation tax and that would all help to offset the costs. The disadvantages would be, again, that individual operation could be established with no public input, would increase staff resources and cost in administrating the system, the licensing system. From the other municipalities, the general thought is that approximately one staff member is required for every 100 short-term rental accommodation units that are licensed in the municipality. So that is that cost is associated and time associated with actually administering it, doing the actual licensing, reviewing the licenses, and then also the enforcement of any complaints through that system. So there is definitely a cost involved with it. Obviously, in all of those options, there's always some hybrids that can be done or a combination of them, such as you could allow them, and we could just continue on in the zoning bylaw as is now, but just start licensing them and then require that licensing. The other major benefit that we found to licensing the other one is that the fact that a lot of the concerns that are raised is not with the use per se, it's more with how they are operating, how the behavior of the individuals at times and how they are operating. So the licensing provides a greater mechanism to try to address that to a certain extent. So what are the next steps? Suggestion of how it's been, and most of the municipalities that we've reviewed usually go through a public input session before deciding on what options to move forward with. So that might be something that council may want to consider going forward with. Obviously, if we are to make changes to the zoning bylaw, as we are through this zoning bylaw review, there is the requirements for, there's an open house requirement, there's a statutory public meeting, and obviously once our COVID-19 situation lends itself to greater public gatherings, then we could look towards those type of mechanisms to gain some public input on it. With that, I think that kind of covers everything, and happy to try and answer any questions council may have.
Greg, thank you for the report. It was lengthy and comprehensive, and hopefully has laid a clearer picture of the situation. I want to ask you, I mean, I think I know the answer, so this is on purpose. In the other communities that have made changes, you have noted, that kind of answered one of my questions, that there's a requirement roughly of one body to manage, monitor, and take care of per 100 rental places. So for a municipality like us, if we found out that we had even the list that you have, it would be the requirement of more staff and resources to go with them. In the other communities, do you know from your research if that scenario is working? So we know who monitors it. We know that they don't have enough staff. We do know that some communities have in fact created like entire departments to take care of this. I guess the question is, having approached this situation in that regard or in that manner in other communities, is it working for them?
If I may, I guess the one we have the best history to is the town of the Blue Mountain. And I would say through our discussions and presentations I've heard where they've been presenting what they've gone through, as with everything, there's been some pluses and minuses. One of the difficulties they do indicate is if you are, the licensing works well, it's a merit system, but if it's challenged, say there's a noise complaint, and so then that becomes, you get a demerit. But what becomes the difficult part is if that's the challenge, that there was no noise complaint, is to have the evidence to support what the issue is. Or if there are ones that are operating that are not licensed, again, the difficulty becomes obtaining the evidence necessary to prosecute that. Because again, you go knock on what can you do? You can go knock on the door, and the person said, well, no, I'm not renting it. I'm the owner's nephew, for example, and stuff. So they have found it's been difficult to enforce that aspect of it. They continue to. I think again, with many of these, the public education factor is huge to it, but they've made a conscious effort. In terms of their costs, they've indicated since 2009, when they started with it, through the official, through the OMB and through all of the enforcement they've done to date, it's cost them over $1 million expense to the municipality to establish the licensing, establish the OP policy, establish the zoning policy. Obviously, there was quite a lengthy, and it was because it was the first one. It was quite a lengthy and detailed hearing on the aspect of it. So that aspect of it. So I don't know if I'm answering your question very well. I think part of it is because so much of it is fairly new. We just don't have the stats to show, is it, number one, is it helping to regulate? Number two, is it stopping the complaints? I think there has been, I would say there has been fewer complaints in the town of the Blue Mountains. However, they do continue to receive complaints.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge is around this issue. What makes it so problematic, as I mentioned earlier, and I think we all know, there's all kinds of people who are just very quietly and happily renting properties, and people come and spend time there, and they have a bonfire, make s'mores, and swim in the lake. They're just living a normal life. It's the bad people, and some of those bad actors are the landlords. They're absentee. I have a box full of emails from over the years of somebody lives in Calgary and bought a property specifically to rent, and the owners themselves have never set foot in the place. It's just a cash cow for them. And well, I mean, there's a million stories, so I'm not going to tell them, but of the greatest concern, and you mentioned this, is it's not that people are necessarily upset that a cottage next door might be a rental property. It's the behavior of those renting it. So it's the conduct of people. There are several in our immediate community here that are almost on a first name basis with the police due to confrontations and threats. And that's the problem. Is we need to address those kinds of things for the safety and the sake and the atmosphere of our community. Working with the OPP and our own bylaw people. But because the net has to be cast wide, because everything we do applies to everybody, it also catches up all the good folks who were just paying money for a cottage experience with no issues, no problems. So. I'm sure that many people will feel like it's unfair to cast that net widely, but we don't have any choice. We can't go and pick and choose different people for behavior problems. To me, it feels a bit like trying to nail Jello to the wall. We know it needs to happen, but how we might go about that is problematic and will be fraught with concern. Thoughts from council on everything that Greg's told us, questions about what other communities are doing, or go forward thoughts? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
A couple of questions before I give you any thoughts about what we should do. You talked about the public process that's required if we determine that we want to do something within the confines of our zoning bylaw, and that requires public meetings anyway. It just seems to me that this is a big enough issue, in our municipality and in the county, in fact, that it would require a separate hearing, or not hearing, public meeting. And I just kind of wanted your thoughts on that. And the other thing that I was wondering about is, if we decide that we're going to license or regulate short-term rentals in any way, are we going to be able to, having heard you say that the existing short-term rental units have sort of a existing non-conforming acceptance, I'm hoping that you're going to say that we would have a method to not control is not the word I'm looking for, but to bring them into the new regime.
Sure. Okay. For you, Madam Mayor. First one, yeah, separate meeting. I would strongly suggest that, as you indicated, is obviously a very contentious issue in municipalities that I've been involved with and going through the research. So I would suggest that it would appropriate to what we're doing today in terms of pulling it out and dealing with it separately as part of the zoning bylaw review. So there's two options there. One is continue to do it, but as part of the zoning bylaw review, but have separate meetings specifically on that topic would be a great idea. Or we can just pull it and do a separate bylaw specifically on short-term rentals if that's what council decides to do in the future. In terms of the grandfathering or the non-conforming, under the Planning Act, non-conforming, you can't prevent something that was legally permitted to when it was established. If you change the bylaws, you cannot stop it from continuing to operate. However, if you were doing the licensing, there is no grandfathering to licensing. So if you went the licensing process, that would afford you the opportunity to set all short rentals, whether they are established since 1950, for example, or established in 2021, would need to be licensed. And you would quite often you provide a time period to allow that to happen. So you wouldn't start your licensing tomorrow. So you would give them warning, give them a certain amount of time to do it. But once that was established, if we're not licensed, if they didn't come through to get their license, then they would not be permitted under the licensing bylaw. And also it allows you, they would then be subject to the same provision set out in the licensing, which may deal with operations, the num say, for example, indicating what they can advertise in terms of their occupancy load, being tying that to the number of bedrooms, for example, would be something, or a separation distance from it. So those things would then apply. So we could catch the existing ones in that aspect. So again, that would be going, I hate to say it, but in terms of more behavioral kind of aspects of the is the licensing portion.
Thank you.
Councillor Barry. You need to unmute yourself.
Just wondering, just throwing a bit of a curveball, wondering how would this work with people that are cottage sharing? There's no money involved, but they're, it's their summer week and they're going to bring 30 of their people, and are they then immune to it? If they're not, they would not fall into this at all?
Through you, Madam Mayor, again. Typically, it would be what the definition is, but normally the definition would be that there's got to be an exchange of either funds or something along that line. So it's more of a commercial aspect to it. So if you're, or my brother's renting my cottage, or doesn't even rent it, so you come and use it while I'm not using it, well, then wouldn't be considered a short-term rental.
Yeah, I think we need to remember that we're not trying to stop people having fun. Let's be very clear about that. To your comment, Lisa, which is a really good one, people have family reunions at cottages, people have weddings at cottages, and those are occasional big groups for someone's important celebration. And I personally see those very different to what Greg has just said about that commercial machine, which is just $2,500 a week for a new family every week for 12, 15, 18, 52 weeks, without any ability to ensure that the folks that are coming to visit the community are behaving properly. I mean, we all have to put up with. I think my neighbors put up with it last week. There's a bunch of people came up for someone's birthday and they were water skiing and singing and they had a bonfire late at night. That's not a big deal. It's the commercial and the lack of accountability, the bad behavior, the disregard for, as Greg had mentioned, shorelines, fisheries, bonfires, fire bans, fire code infractions, threats, confrontations, and all, it's just all that negative behavior. And it could well be the case that no matter what we do, we can't, we put all the licensing in place we want, but if we can't control, monitor, manage, and enforce the behavior, then we'll have done it for naught. So to me, it seems we can tighten up the rules all we want, but the bigger conversation for us as elected officials in terms of budgetary considerations is, are we prepared to move forward in any manner, which we know full well will significantly impact the budget, because we will have to hire people and give them tools to do this job with. To me, that's the biggest question. So that would be my thought. Lisa Berry.
Now, if we were to just to tighten up the existing zoning bylaws and possibly add maybe a couple other things involved with, like, say, noise restrictions. I mean, we're already looking at preserving our shorelines and that. Would there not still be a cost associated with those? And those affect everyone, not a specific group.
Greg, did you want to take that?
Sure, I can to a certain extent. Obviously, like noise, it's not something you would put into the zoning bylaw. You have a noise bylaw under the municipal act, so that. But any bylaw, no matter what you put, and the way it is today, there's obviously, even with the fact that they're permitted, there is a cost involved to a certain extent, because you still receive some complaints, inquiries with regards, so there's always staff time to answer those. The real cost, I would say, comes into is the licensing, and then because then you have to administer it, and you have to review those licenses, and then that becomes more of the enforcement, because it sets out certain things that need to be done. Whereas the zoning bylaw right now, it's open, they're permitted, so there's not a whole lot of enforcement. They're allowed. So the enforcement right now is probably, again, going back to the mayor's comment, is the complaints that are received with regards to noise, fires, etc., parking, which are already at the disposal of the township under their existing bylaw.
Greg, can you answer me this in terms of the public input, because it is a public process. Are you suggesting or recommending that we would go out officially for public comment now, or have council pick the direction they'd like to go, which would undoubtedly come with more staff research with some specific details for our purposes, and then go to public with that? Because my concern is to go out for formal public input now. It's too broad ranging, because there are so many options available and nuances within all those options. So what are your thoughts on that? About are you looking, it's not your meeting, but looking for council to say which direction they do or don't want to go in, and then ask staff to bring more back?
Yes, definitely some direction would be helpful, whether, like, we're happy to go out to the public now, or, prepare some kind of a survey. Always surveys, as I'm sure you know, they always difficult to write them. What I've learned is how you ask the questions can influence how they are answered. And as people always say, statistics can be read in many ways, any way you want to use them. So it is one thing. So I think it would be helpful to get some, if this is something that council would like to review further and wants us to continue with, then we can get more information. And if there's, say, one of those options that council thinks is more appropriate, that would help to refine and help us bulk what we bring back to you. For example, if licensing is something you would like to look into, we can definitely provide you with further examples of specific license bylaws, perhaps what would be involved in doing that. And we can work with, I can work with staff, your staff on that, and work through with other municipalities that have established the licensing.
What I'm thinking is in terms of, I like a streamlined process. I think what I'll do is go back and ask council in a moment, what direction they'd like to go in based on the options that have been presented. And then when that comes back, that if something is going to come back, then that's the thing that would go to the public. Because it's a little more refined. It's not like a big, right now we have a big playing field. So, I mean, there's no point, not dissimilarly to other topics at other tables, there's no point in asking the public to weigh in on something that we ultimately were never going to consider. That's unfair to all involved. So I think what I'll do at this moment is just circle back to ask council individually the very, very basic question based on the conversation, what you know in your own words and what's happening around us. It's a bit of a yes/no question. Does council want to do something about the management of short-term rentals? And I would just ask members of council to say it's kind of a yes or no, and then we can carry on from there. Anybody? I'm a yes, I can tell you that. Councillor Shortbeat, is that your hand in the air?
And I'm muting myself. Yes, I'm a yes.
Councillor Meredith.
I'm interested in hearing public opinion and considering, I'm not for prohibiting them, but looking at maybe some collaboration between zoning amendments and possibly licensing, but I feel I still want to hear more information.
So more information about what those details would look like.
Yeah.
And then we would consider, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your answer. So it's a yes, you'd like to do something, but we're going to look at more details first. So what you're saying.
Yes.
Madam Deputy Mayor.
I am definitely a yes. I think that if I can make a couple of comments, I'm absolutely gobsmacked at the dollars that you said that we might be faced with. I'm quite sure it wouldn't be. Well, I would hope it wouldn't be nearly that much here. But we're already spending money in bylaw enforcement and complaints and follow up. And, I think we need to consider that. I think that when we're talking about the money aspect, that there is a certain amount of revenue associated with licensing and or taxation. I think that given the amount of, I have been, and I'm sure that Carol for sure, has been absolutely swamped with emails about this, particularly since people have learned that we're having this meeting. There are a lot of concerns on kind of both sides. And I really think that we need to go through a process that considers licensing or possible rezoning, different taxation rates. We need to have, if we're going to have licensing, that it would include the need for rental insurance. I think that that's a big thing that some people maybe don't consider. I kind of liked the demerit system that we saw in one of the examples, but that's down the road. So, I guess that really my answer is yes. I'd really like us to look into this, and I truly believe that we need to take some action to create a fairer playing field, because there are probably people with units, with short-term accommodation units, that are making far more money than our accommodators who are paying all of the commercial fees and everything associated with running a business. It's just not fair the way things are right now.
Yeah, and I think I've alluded to this before, and I'm probably going to say it many more times. Based on the information that's been provided, and Deputy Mayor, you just mentioned about the an opportunity for revenues. Well, that automatically gets transferred into money grab, and the township's out for a money grab, and it's clear that it's unlikely there would ever be enough revenue generated to cover the costs of the job ahead. So let's be clear about that. And we also need to give credit, I think, not that anyone is not giving credit, but to the folks who really are, they're running a decent, tidy small business, and they do pay commercial insurance, and they do submit their taxes, and there are people who are actually doing that. So we need to make sure that we understand and that the public understands that we know that rentals run across a very broad spectrum. So there are people that are terrible landlords who have terrible people with, just like a real estate lockbox. They never meet. It's a money exchange online, and then all the way up to the cottage rental agencies where they have big long lists of codes of conduct and deposits and it runs the gamut. Is the point that there is no one style of rental that is any better or worse than any other. I think it comes down to the behavior and the fact that we don't have any tools or mechanism in place to enforce the shoddy behavior, and that's where we're going to have to go. I do see your hand, Lisa. We've noticed too with COVID, there's a lot of people trying to get out of the city. Travel's been restricted. Cottage sales are booming right now as people try and get their hands on their own little piece of the pie. This, in a bigger general sense, the community, all of our communities are changing very quickly, and as a municipality, notwithstanding just this issue, we need to ensure that we remain responsive to those changes. A lot of people have learned that they, if they have good enough high speed, that they can work from the cottage, which is a dream for all kinds of people. So anything we do with short-term rentals, we need to remember is one piece of a bigger pie of this community changing, and how as elected officials who are in charge of the public dollar, we may have some big expenditures ahead as we try to keep ahead of the changes of the community and its needs. So that's just my little speech on that. Lisa Berry.
I just want to emphasize that I feel where my standpoint is not specific to short-term rentals. I found one of the most interesting things from Greg's report is in Muskoka having an existing code of conduct, and I feel that everyone, whether they're renters or they're residents or they're cottagers, I think protecting the lake and the safety of the infrastructures around us is paramount.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, the muddy water around that is, how do you hold someone to the code of conduct if we don't ultimately have the people who can go and knock on the door and say, whatever it is they're going to say. I keep saying on my Facebook page, if you're experiencing a problem, I just posted it around the fire ban. If someone has a fire during the fire ban, don't tell Facebook, tell the 911 dispatcher. So we are increasingly, people are complaining into a social media platform instead of complaining to the township. And additionally, currently we don't have our two bylaw enforcement officers are also the building inspectors, and the construction industry is very busy. So we don't have building bylaw enforcement people who are out looking for infractions. So again, I'm back to that. This conversation, if we move it forward to implement something, whatever it might look like, it's going to cost us. It's going to cost money, and we're going to have bodies to do the work. But I think everyone knows that. So what I'm hearing is, yes, you want to do something. I guess I'm looking for from council, having heard about and read about some of the options and processes that are happening in other municipalities, pros and cons of each of those, and is there any one particular process you like? Greg had said that options 1 and 2 wouldn't serve the purpose of what we want to do. Options 3 and 4 would, and it looks like, if you can correct me, Greg, you're suggesting number 4 is the one that allows for the most. It's the most work, but it would be the one that would most address the concerns that the community is experiencing around the issues. Is that correct?
That would be my impression, yes. So the zoning bylaw gets more towards the use, whether it should permit it or not. And so if the question's not the use per se, and more about how it operates, then the licensing bylaw would be the best mechanism to follow.
Mm-hmm. And Councillor Barry, you had mentioned too about getting more information, and I clarified partially that was about some more details around what it would look like and how it would work. my next question to council then is, do you want to wait until that comes back for our review before taking it through a public process? Or do you want to start asking people formally, knowing full well, this is very important for public comment. This is a public process. Public comment is public. We don't take anonymous complaints or stories. So the whole thing is we need to clearly inform the public how they would participate. This is not a naming and shaming game. We would look for constructive suggestions and ideas, comments from the public. And I think we prefer concrete concerns as opposed to just, I hate my neighbor. And people would need to know that all feedback goes into the public forum. It was suggested that we set up a separate email account for this so that Mr. O'Callaghan, our planner, can keep those emails separate in his already very busy world, and that we would, council would have access to those pieces of public input because they would form part of the public record. This is not a secret angry letter to your local councillor. It's part of the public forum. So do you want to do that now or do you want to wait? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I honestly think that we need to have just a little bit more information that so that we're actually presenting something. It's fine to say that you know, we're looking at option 4, but it might be a hybrid of option 4. It might not be in the zoning bylaw. It could be a totally separate licensing bylaw. I think we need a little bit more before we go out to the public. I do like the idea of having a separate email address so people can write in and we've got a public record of where people stand. Yeah, I think we need to do just a little bit more work before we start going out to the public. The public is going to contact us and let us know how they feel. I mean, they're doing that now, knowing that we're going to be having a discussion about it. I really liked the idea that Greg had about education. It's obvious that there's some clarifications. I mean, maybe we just need to amend the bylaw, but there's obviously some misunderstanding about what's allowed and what's not allowed. You know, we've had a mail from people that's not allowed. It's illegal for them to have that. And that's not the case. So there's a real educational component to what we need to do. And I know this is going to cost us money and it's going to add work to our load. But I think that it is a big enough issue already and will become a bigger one that we do need to do something.
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts from, it's funny, I keep looking for Councillor Dayu, of course she's not here. Councillor Shortreed.
Sorry, I think I agree with Liz. I think we have to whittle this down a little bit before we go to the public for their opinion or their concerns. But I like the idea of the email and having a place for people to send their inquiries or responses.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, Julie, you vanished off the screen. I don't know if you clicked your video button. Oh,
there
hello.
we are.
There you are. That certainly would be my preference, is to refine the idea down just a wee bit more with some options, and then that's what we ask the public about. You know, we know we're going to hear all manner of comments, and would just reiterate that we're looking for you know, constructive contributions that can help us make the best decisions for the future of the community, as opposed to, you know, trying to wreck anybody's life. That's not why we're here. So, Greg, is that enough for you? I'm hearing loosely number 4. It needs to be a little further investigated, and then, you know, what that might look like, process, maybe some more detailed input from other communities. You know, if we know we have a sampling of the list, we would need to know, well, you know, in order to have that, you're gonna need 3 people, 2 cars, 2 laptops, or, you know what I mean? Like, this is what it's going to cost you. It's July, we're going into budget. I don't know that we'll get through our zoning bylaw process in time for the 2021 budget. I think that's up to Sean and Greg to tell us where we are on that. And I have said to people, nothing's happening next week, nothing's happening overnight, and that there's lots of conversation yet to have so that we can, have that more fulsome conversation. So would that be, Greg and Sean, would that be enough, saying council's looking at number 4, but wants to know way more about what that looks like? I do see your hands, but I'm gonna get an answer from Greg and Sean.
That's, Madam Mayor, to me, that's fine. That gives direction. I can put together some further information specifically, sounds like on the licensing aspect of going forward and what that would involve, and try and get some further information as to cost and as you indicated, the success rate, or are they finding that it is working well?
Mm-hmm. I saw hands from Councillor Barry and Danielson, so I'll go with Lisa first.
Just to clarify, so to me, I sort of felt council threw out that we would just not do anything. So that's, to me, that's option 1. We also sort of said that we don't want to outright prohibit them, which is basically option 2. And I feel like the most of the discussion today was option 3 and option 4. So to me, I don't want to not consider option 3.
Greg, could you take us through the difference between 3 and 4 once again?
Sure, I guess, excuse me. Option 4 basically is defining it in the bylaw, setting out where it would be pitted. Again, this question becomes, do you want it everywhere in the municipality or just in certain spots? And the difference between 3, so that's 3, that what option 4 does, the additional aspect is it puts into the licensing process as well.
Right.
So 3 is establish it in the OP, establish it in the zoning bylaw, and then option 4 is those, plus it then requires licensing of the unit under the Municipal Act.
Right. Okay, and then I think Deputy Mayor Danielson had her hand up. Next.
I did, and I'm still kind of stuck on. I really believe that we need to look at licensing. I really like the demerit system. I thought that was an interesting thing. And to Lisa's comment, and well, I think I commented as well about a code of conduct. It really does impact everybody. I found it interesting that that when I went to the Highlands East open house, there was I don't know, I would say maybe as many as 150 people in the community center, and it was divided right down the center between whether it should be allowed or shouldn't be allowed, and there was all kinds of thoughts. But it became apparent that there was as much problem that the renters were finding from the permanent residents or the neighbors as the other way around. I mean, it's not just short-term rental people that can be problematic, and that the code of conduct really is something that might apply to everybody.
Well, yeah, and you make a good point, because ultimately what's extremely disappointing is that municipalities have to go to all this work, effort, expense, and hiring of people because certain people can't just be nice. And what happened to civility and decorum? That's, for what we're hearing, that's what it comes down to. Is it just comes down to really crummy behavior on the part of a landlord and or their renters, and in some cases an unwillingness or an inability to do anything about it. And so, if people could just be good people, we probably wouldn't have a lot of these problems. But it does, to your point, Liz, it does apply. That applies to everybody, not just renters.
Yeah.
So I think the CAO might be wanting to weigh in, but I'm not sure. Oh, she's saying no. She's waving her hand around. All right, so that's what we'll do then, is we'll ask Greg and Sean to have a look at those options. We are by no means making a decision. We are just pointing the ship in a certain direction for further consideration. And we'll bring that back. Greg, what's your time frame on that? Do you think we would have that for when? No rush.
I always say you tell me is usually, is it something that you want, say, within next month, to come back, or I'm seeing a
I
nod.
think-
So yeah,
I think it-
I can
yeah,
see
I
what
think
I
it
put
has to in
together.
terms of-
Obviously,
Go ahead, please.
sorry. I just, in terms of, I know you're into getting it to your clerk to get it to you in time, so that's usually 2 weeks before. So getting something, I'm not sure when your schedule is, but within the next month, that only gives me a couple of weeks to it in order to bring it back at the beginning of August or so. But I will definitely do my best and bring you whatever information we have on it. It's not bringing new information that's not already out. So it's just a matter of gathering it and putting it to you.
We can have a special meeting as well. We can do this again quite easily and just make sure we just have the one item to focus on, so that we give it our full concentration. Angie, Madam CAO, you're looking at your calendar there. What do you think of her timing?
Well, our regular meeting is on the 13th. So we would need something from Greg sort of the week prior to that. But if council was considering a special meeting, that could give him, another week's time perhaps. So the following week.
Isn't our regular meeting on the 15th, not the 13th?
The 13th is a Thursday, the 15th is a Saturday.
Are you looking at August?
Well,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking at July. Sorry.
So is that okay for council? And maybe I can just keep in touch with the clerk and the CAO, and if Greg gets done rather quickly, we can convene a special meeting, not unlike this one, to carry on. Liz, go ahead, please.
It would be, I think, as you said, we could have a special meeting with respect to it if we're pushing the envelope for Greg a bit too much. But it would be nice to have another discussion while our seasonal people are here. I think they need to hear the direction we're going and know how they can, maybe at that time, know how they can have more say.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was wondering is we had spoken before about the possibility of using the bang the table system, which the county has subscribed to, and I don't know, Madam CAO, I don't believe we've flicked the switch on our subscription on that yet, have we?
Not as yet, but I don't believe it would take very long to do that.
Mm-hmm. And the whole COVID situation, we want to make sure that we cover the bases for opportunities for input, because we could decide it's okay to have an open house. But even with stage 2 reopening for the provincial orders, there's a lot of people that are not comfortable going out. So we want to make sure that we have as robust an opportunity for people to provide input through another avenue. And I think bang the table might be the way to do it. But Greg's right about crafting questions. We don't want to craft trap questions. And then if we can have just do a quick page on our website that explains a little bit about the definitions, and then says, if you'd like to make, a narrative input, you can email, str@algonquinhighlands.ca. I think it's important for us to cover all the bases given the times that we're in, so that people can feel they've been included in the process. Deputy Mayor?
I just wondered if Greg, if you've got any sense of how the surveys came back in Minden Hills and Highlands East, if there was anything definitive that came out of that.
I think, as you indicated from my reading of ones that were there, is quite similar, quite a split between those why some girls be put in place and others feeling, lack of a better phrase, too much government intervention is enough thing. So my reading of all that, it's a fairly 50-50 split from all the ones I've been involved in, those who put something needs addressed and those who feel it shouldn't be addressed.
Too much
I
government
have been involved in
yeah.
one in another municipality. We had the public open house, and quite honestly, one of the good aspects of it, there were quite a few who did have short-term rentals, were quite receptive to having a license and put in place and having requirements from them. They didn't see that as a bad thing. They thought it would be a good thing. One of the things that come with that was obviously the cost of that licensing, especially cottagers, for example. If you're renting your cottage 3 weeks a year, all of a sudden your licensing's $1,000, $2,000 to get that license, then I'm not going to do anymore. It's going to put me right out of business. That aspect of it, it defeats the purpose of doing it to begin with. So those were kind of the things that I've seen in responses from the public.
I did ask Sean this the other day, but I'm going to ask either him or you to tell us again, because I know there's people out there in TV land. The COVID-19 and the slowdowns from the pandemic certainly put a damper on the traditional zoning bylaw process. We should have been having public meetings on all manner of things, probably in July. We're not. Do we have any ultimate timelines? And we still have to talk about just setting some dates for some other issues that are in the report. What's our overall timeline for having this zoning bylaw done?
You want to take that, Sean? Be consistent with the answer.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have started the process, but obviously with the constraints in place right now concerning public meetings, it has sort of put the brakes on where we can proceed. So we are doing more background work on things such as short-term rentals as part of this discussion, and there are a few other topics that will be coming forward to council for some further direction on. So, I mean, as far as concrete timelines, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, at this point, we're in almost the middle of July. So, I mean, we can certainly go out for some public input, but as far as holding the required open house and statutory public meetings, I think that's where we're going to have some issues at this point. So it's looking like it's going to be pushed into next year to complete.
Yeah, so if there's any opportunity for feedback on that politically, we want to make sure that it's fully recognized that we have a tremendous seasonal population, and this particular issue affects that population, and that we wouldn't want the province to say, well, stage 3 opening has happened, and we're putting all your legislative timelines back in place, and you have to be done by March, because that wouldn't be helpful for us, because we need the summer season to properly consult. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Okay, so there's a couple of other things on the agenda. The planner people have said that they have enough to take away to put a little more framework around for us to consider, and we could say no at the end. It's just the next steps. Is there anything else on short-term rentals anybody wants to say? Sean has his hand in the air. Mr. O'Callaghan.
Yeah, so just to clarify, with the report coming back to council on the licensing, will the email with the for short-term rentals, will that be set up following that meeting, or does council want that set up prior to the report coming back?
I would think it could be set up now, and it's just to feed into the process, and we would ask a different set of questions, I think, through a different forum, being possibly Bang the Table, once if and when we refine exactly the direction we're going. Because right now we were looking at this, we're now kind of looking like this, and I hope we get to a smaller, it's kind of what I heard was more refinement in the consideration, and then take that to the public for the formal process, like the Bang the Table, which is the wide open part. But by all means, people can email their counselor. Counselors would forward those emails into STR at Algonquin Highlands so that Sean can manage them, and then we would have access through File Pro. He would let us know there's new correspondence for us to review, so that we can stay up to date with what folks are submitting now. Still part of the public process, the formal input, and then we would do something later. So does that make sense to council to do the STR at Algonquin Highlands now to capture current comment, knowing full well we'll be asking for some specific comment when we have more details around this. I'm seeing nodding heads. Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Just one other question, and this is my lack of understanding about Zoom meetings. Is there a way for us to, if we wanted to have public consultation and we're still limited on the number of people that we can have gather, to put people in a queue that they could come into a Zoom meeting one at a time and make their comments? Other people who couldn't necessarily maybe participate by Zoom could call in to the same forum. Like, could we look at a process like that at some point in time if we're still limited to the number of people who can gather?
So we had this conversation at our last meeting around public meetings for zoning amendments and committee of adjustment. And I believe our ultimate decision was that it's possible there are too many challenges with connectivity or some folks' ability to understand or use Zoom or have the right computer, or I do know there's a zoning issue coming to us, and a person who has very passionate feelings on that has an iPad for playing solitaire and has lousy internet, and they can't participate that way. So I think they're going to phone in. I'm not sure. And I think at our last meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, we decided that in order to make a level playing field for all participants, that it would be by telephone. Yes, so staff here is telling me that that's the decision we made around these kinds of meetings at our last discussion. So there's still an opportunity for input, but we wouldn't be looking at faces. So, but I mean, maybe connectivity will change very quickly, and that could be a
No, it's not going to change very quickly. Hopefully it'll change.
Well, and so then maybe that's part of the next, that's part of the report that can come forward, and it might require a little bit of consultation with county IT is okay, if this is the route we're going, we want to provide, when we get to that stage, very clear and helpful instruction to the public on how they can participate. Yeah. So that would have to be, first is then that process. Sean, did you have something else you wanted to say?
No.
Okay, you're good. Okay, well, thanks everybody for that great conversation. Carrying on a couple of other items in the report, the other items that we had over the years just picked out as needing a little bit of separate discussion are contained in the report. Greg, did you want to just take us through those? I think the idea is that we could have a separate meeting to address those 4 or 5 things, much as we've done today. None of these individually is as big as this one, so that I think the thinking was that those 3 or 4 things could be in one separate special meeting, so we can give it our full attention. I don't know who wants to speak to that, Sean or Greg. It's going to be Greg.
Okay, I guess it's me. Yeah, definitely is. So those other issues, they're definitely not in depth as the short-term rentals. So that was our thinking, that we could do another report and just provide an overview of those ones and get direction from council on those. And whether it's at your normal council meetings, I don't see those being more than half an hour per se for a discussion, or it can be another special meeting. But we were going to provide that to you on those aspects. And then the other aspects were that we were at the last meeting were regards to what we know we need to do in order to ensure compliance with the county official plan, the township official plan, and changes at original policy level. And once we have the other
Greg froze.
issues, those 4 or 5 that are mentioned in the report, we would then move forward putting together a review or doing a review of the inter bylaws. So you my thought was in chart form, here's the proposed, here's why if we're changing, here's why we're proposing changing. So that would probably be following in the fall and take it out of the short-term rental. So I see that being perhaps a separate bylaw on it, so we go that way.
Sorry, you were breaking up there a little bit. The short-term rentals being a separate bylaw?
That'd be my recommendation, probably, because we know that's probably the aspect that may have most input from the public, and so we want to just that so it doesn't hold up the remainder of the update to the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, there's a bit of a timing issue there with the county stuff. So is council okay with that? That these folks will break out as we had requested? We'll have a separate meeting similar to this one on those few items that we can probably discuss as a group. I mean separately, of course, but at one sitting. And then that would allow the next step of the process. The big document with the red line in it would be coming forward at a later date, once sort of there's an alignment with the county OP, because there's changes. I mean, we have to change our OP as well for some legislative changes, but we have to do that at the behest of the county. So there's a timing challenge there. But is council okay with that to address these items just a little bit separately another day? Yes, yes, yes. I'm seeing nods, so I'm going to take that as concurrence. Madam Barry, do you have a comment? Take your self off mute, please.
Sorry, if we're separating out short-term rentals, just as far as timeline and maybe some consistency, Sean, have you spoken to the other municipalities about where they go with where they're at with that? Like, I know it's a lot of it's still in process, but it would be nice if there was ideally some consistency.
Yeah, a fair question. My understanding is most have paused their process of reviewing this particular topic. So yeah, that's my understanding at this point.
And I think it's important to remember that all of this could change depending on conversations as regards the service delivery review of the county. It's been mentioned, it's in the public realm that something like short-term rentals makes sense to approach county-wide. We until today, we were the last municipality to to have a look at this particular issue. Lisa, were you talking more about where the other municipalities might be standing on the remaining items, such as cannabis and dwelling size and chickens and that kind of thing?
I guess ideally, like the more consistency we can have, it's awful when one neighbor can do something in one township and one can't in another, ideally.
That's a very broad-based concern in the community. There's no question about that. Well, and I mean, I think part of what these folks do is check with the neighbors anyway. So, all right. Well, do you want a separate meeting, or do you want to tack this on to our next council meeting? I don't know. When's our next council meeting? Next week? It won't be next week. Do you want a separate meeting for these handful of items? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So we'll do that, and we'll look forward to your reports on those few items. Any other final comments on today's conversation, or something we have forgotten or you want to add? All right, we'll leave it at that, and I would thank Mr. Corbett and Mr. Callahan for their time and work on putting this together for us. It's going to be an interesting conversation going forward. Okay, thanks, Greg and Sean. And I think it will probably vanish from the screen. John's still there. Yeah, doesn't matter. Okay. Then we have a resolution that says something. So I need to accept the report. I would like a mover and a seconder to accept the report on the bylaw review for short-term rentals. Councillor Shortreed and Deputy Mayor Danielson. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved, Council acknowledge receipt of report PL 4120 regarding the short-term rental accommodations submitted by Greg Corbett, consulting planner for the township, and dated July 10th, 2020. And further, that council directs staff to bring back additional information to council for further consideration. Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
That is carried.
Thank you for that. Next up is the confirmatory bylaw, and we'll just bring Councillor Dayu back in.
I just wonder if, because Councillor Dayu was not here, the part of our discussion involved items other than short-term accommodations. Are we going to try and set a date to deal with those items now, or?
We could. I think I would leave it to the clerk to look at the calendar, because there's all kinds of, there's holidays and staff have meetings and different things. So, and I would think I would leave it to the clerk to have a look at the overall municipal calendar for related staff.
Yes. Send out.
And then send out some options by email. Is that all right? Looks like some nods. Right, may I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw? Councillor Berry, Councillor Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Berry, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved that bylaw 2020-59 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held during its July 10th, 2020 special meeting be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed. Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
And Councillor Dayu?
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
That is carried.
Adjournment. May I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn today's special meeting of council? Councillor Dayu and Councillor Berry.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved that July 10th, 2020 special meeting of council is hereby adjourned at 10:35 a.m. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
That's carried.
Great. Well, that concludes the meeting. Thanks, everybody, and we'll just unhook from the live stream, and then we'll carry on our days.